religious society in Israel is very much indebted to their rabbinical leaders, and they have a huge amount of sway in their community. The most, revered rabbis, and probably the most revered of all is this man, Ovadia Yosef, just to give you a sense of how important this rabbi is in Israeli society. He's now passed. He died a few years ago. When he died, his funeral was the largest in Israeli history. Hundreds of thousands of people attended. It was massive. And just so you, again, an insight into what moves him, he said, Gentiles, non-Jews, were born only to serve us. Without that, they have no place in the world, only to serve the Jewish people. This is Ovadia Yosef. Why are Gentiles needed? They'll work, they'll plow, they'll reap. We will sit like an effendi and eat. This is Israel's number one rabbi. A real brainiac here. Okay, so that's Ovadia Yosef. But, of course, he sired essentially, a dynasty. He was the chief rabbi of Israel. Now his son is the chief rabbi of Israel. He spawned a whole host of, and beyond that, beyond just being, occupying the chief rabbinate, his followers also founded a political party in Israel to take that religious power and convert it into political power. And so they started the Shas party. And one of the first members of Knesset to represent the Shas party in the Knesset was Ovadia's son, Yaakov Yosef. But unlike his father, he didn't believe in waiting for some messianic age to bring about his eliminationist ideology. He wanted to do it right now. And so in the Knesset, one of the things that he's most remembered for is stripping anti-racist laws of any heft. So, of course, as I said earlier, once Kahana became an impactful voice in Israeli society, the Knesset tried to pass a law that would make it illegal to incite racism. Okay? And in fact, they did pass this law and making it illegal to incite racism. But Yaakov Yosef worked to make sure that Kahana would still be able to. What he did was he tinkered with the law so that there was a loophole in it. And the loophole said, well, if you're justifying this racism that you're inciting by predicating it on religious arguments, then it's okay, you have an exemption. As long as you have a religious argument to support your racist argument, then you get by, you aren't punished for your incitement. So that we can thank Yaakov Yosef for. Another classic example, he was one of the rabbis who openly endorsed the King's Torah, a book that came out about a decade ago. This book, it's essentially, as Max has written about, essentially a Gentile baby murdering manual, I'm sad to say. Amongst the texts, here's a quote from the book, for example. There is justification for killing babies if it is clear that they will grow up to harm us. Okay? Now, these aren't only words on paper. These words have effect. The reason they write these words is so that people can carry them out, and that's what happens. That's what happened in the village of Duma, when followers of the Kahana movement firebombed the house of a family and burnt to death in their beds, father, mother, and one-year-old baby, the Dawabshe family. All right? So this is Yaakov Yosef, and he's loved and praised and held up as a hero in his community. He's not marginalized. So he's a classic Kahanist, sure, and that shows the symmetry and the synthesis between the Kahanists and the Shas party. But now it's out in the open. If before it was masked, now the mask has fallen. So with his son, all right, now the grandson of Ovadia Yosef, so we're now 3 generations of ultra-racists, and the grandson, Yonatan Yosef, well, he's got a backstory. I should probably tell the backstory, how he came into the movement. It was probably instructive. So when he was just 18 years old, at that point, Israel founded for the first time an ultra-Orthodox army unit. As I explained earlier, the ultra-Orthodox prefer not to engage in the dirty work of oppressing Palestinians. They prefer to remain in the yeshiva and the religious seminary and study Torah and Talmud. But at that point, we're talking 20, 22 years ago, the Israeli government decided we're going to start one ultra-Orthodox unit of the army. So at that point, Yonatan Yosef, he didn't serve in it, but he had friends in it, and he arranged with them to smuggle weapons out of the army, and they collected caches of weapons, and they plotted to murder Palestinians. And he was arrested in the Kahanist yeshiva, where he was living, the Kahanist religious seminary in Jerusalem, arrested there, and he would have been put away for a long time, but Kahana's replacement in the Knesset, an advocate of ethnic cleansing that replaced him, Rechavam Ze'evi, was a minister in the government at that time, and he heard word from the Shin Bet that they were going to come and arrest Yonatan Yosef, so he gave him a phone call to give him a heads up. Watch out, they're coming to arrest you. Hide all the ammunition that you've been storing. And so he was able to, get it out of his room in time so that when the cops came to arrest him, they didn't find all the evidence that they could have. And so he actually got off really easy. Of course, today you may know Yonatan Yosef as Jerusalem city councilor. This is a city councilor of Al-Quds, okay? You may, and of course you've seen him on video, right? You've heard him speaking. We take house after house, talking about the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem, of course. All of this area will be a Jewish neighborhood. We are not finished the job. We are going to the next neighborhood, and after that we'll go more. Is it at the Arabs' expense? Yes. This is Yonatan Yosef, and this is his henchman, Yaakov Fauci. I'm sure you remember him. He's the one living in the Al-Qurd family home in Sheikh Jarrah. So this is Yonatan Yosef. Now, it's not bad enough that we have one Kahana city councilor. We've actually got at least two. His partner in crime, also not just a city councilor, but the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, if you could imagine this, Aryeh King. And he's even worse. Aryeh King, in 2014, in the summer of 2014, he stood, this is a photograph of him at that time, standing in front of a crowd of hundreds of ultra-Orthodox men, and he tells them, this Sabbath, we will read about Zimri and Cosbi. Now, what is Zimri and Cosbi? It's a story in the Bible, and according to this legend, there was a Jewish man and a Midianite woman. In other words, it was an interracial relationship. And this priest, Phineas, was so incensed, so disgusted at this miscegenation, at this interracial love, that he actually took a spear, according to legend, and he murdered them in the middle of the act of lovemaking. In fact, according to the Talmud, it says, well, okay, first of all, King continues, he explains what he's talking about so there's no people in the audience who wouldn't know what he means. Phineas committed the act. He was zealous for God. And according to the Talmud, what that act was, miracles were done for Phineas. His aim was through the penis of the man and the vagina of the woman. That he pierced them in their intertwined genitals. I can hardly think of a more revolting image to conjure. So this is the story he's telling. Remember the story of Zimri and Cosbi? Remember that? Phineas committed the act. He got up and committed the act. And it's not just like that in the times of the Bible. It's like that today. Every single person here is like a small Phineas. I call out to all the small Phineases here in the audience. I call on all of us to make a great commotion. Wake up. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is here with us. A greatly revered rabbi that died, but he's here with us right now. And I have no doubt he expects us all to commit acts of Phineas, to commit acts of murder and mutilation. And like I said, it's not only words. Hours later, religious Jews went out and they mutilated and murdered a Palestinian teenager in Shofat, Muhammad Abu Khder. They kidnapped him from outside his home. They stuffed him into a car and they drove him out to the forest. and they forced petrol down his throat, and they burned him to death from the inside out. That's Aryeh King. That's the deputy mayor of Jerusalem.